Hi, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My fabulous co-host is Laura Blackwell. Um, and if you're here for the first time, relax, grab your beverage of choice, and get ready for, we think, really some of the best spoken word speculative fiction you're going. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thanks for coming back. Um, I started Story Hour in the early days of the pandemic in 2000, almost 5 years ago, if you can believe that. And my intention was to create a place where my friends and I could share our work with each other and just create some community in what was kind of a deeply weird time. We were all sort of stepping into the ephemeral future that we've read and written about for many. Uh, we are still in deeply weird times, so I think we still need each other. So um, we've been at it for 5 years, and um, we are still going strong. So thanks to my co-hosts and to all of you and our amazing writers. The way this works is really simple. It's kind of one of the oldest forms of entertainment in human history, which is folks sitting around the fire telling lies to each other. And so every week we do exactly that. We have two authors, about 30 minutes each, and they share their work with Laura and I and with all of you out there. So tonight we are really delighted to have Tiffany Michelle Brown and M. Lopes da Silva. And we're going to start off with Tiffany Michelle Brown. But before we do, I want to acknowledge SIFWA's Giver's Grant for providing us with some money to take care of Zoom and web hosting fees. We've been getting Giver's Grants for a couple years now, and hopefully we will continue to do so. So Tiffany Michelle Brown is an LA-based writer who once had a conversation with a ghost over a pumpkin beer. She's the author of How Lovely to Be a Woman, Stories and Poems, and she is co-host of the Horror in the Margins podcast. Her fiction and poetry have been featured in publications by Tenebris Press, Slay House Publishing, Hungry Shadow Press, and the No Sleep podcast. Tiffany, thanks so much for joining us. Take it away.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of the Story Hour, so it's wonderful to be here. And I think we need community and stories a whole lot right now. I'm going to be reading the first story in my collection, How Lovely to Be a Woman, Stories and Poems, and this is called The Price of Motherhood. A quick content warning, this story does contain some conversation about infertility issues, as well as a little bit of body horror and gore. So please protect your mental health if you need to. This is The Price of Motherhood. For the bargain price of $79,999.95, which she would pay in monthly installments of $99.95 for the next 66 years, not including interest, Leslie Dawson became a mother. The day the courier arrived, Leslie wore her most responsible looking outfit, which she'd bought at Goodwill, especially for the occasion. A blue button-up, khaki pants, and a string of fake pearls. The cotton material was stiff and scratchy, but Leslie resisted the urge to change into her regular uniform of jeans and a t-shirt. She knew first impressions were important. She needed to resemble the epitome of domesticity today, even if only for a paid delivery person. When she heard footsteps ascending the stairwell in her apartment complex, Leslie leaped from the couch and opened her door before the representative from Lifelike had the opportunity to knock. On the threshold, Leslie's smile dropped and her heart clenched. She hadn't expected her baby to arrive in a silver egg-shaped case that reflected the cheap fluorescents in the hallway. When she pictured this day in her mind, she'd imagined the courier showing up with the baby strapped to their chest via a baby Bjorn or pushed in a stroller. There had never been an egg. Leslie Dawson, it's a pleasure. My name is Matthew and I'm from Lifelike. Are you ready to meet your daughter? The man shoved the egg toward her, zooming right
past pleasantries and straight to business. The abruptness left Leslie rattled, and she simply stared until the silence grew awkward.
She cleared her throat and gave him a warm smile. Absolutely. Won't you come in? She'd made Crystal Light lemonade and microwaved some cookies she found on sale at the grocery store. I'm afraid I can't, Matthew said, his voice warm and booming. It's against company protocol, but I do have a few instructions to share, and of course, I'll stay long enough to ensure all is in order. Leslie hazarded a glance down the hallway. Matthew was quite loud, and she was afraid one of her neighbors would emerge to shush them. And what would they see? Why, they'd see this man handing her a huge silver egg while she stood there dumbly in her imposter pearls. Leslie's cheeks flushed as she took the egg from Matthew. Is it okay for me to set this down? She asked. It's a bit heavy. It wasn't, but she longed to tuck the egg inside the apartment, safe from prying eyes. Of course, while you do, a few instructions. Inside the package, there's a manual. It's very important that you read the manual front to back and dial in all of your preferred settings via your smartphone before you initiate your daughter's heartbeat. Leslie blinked. Initiate her heartbeat? What the hell did that mean? Her face must have betrayed her confusion because Matthew gave her a good-natured chuckle. It's not a difficult process, I assure you. It'll make sense once you've read the manual. Again, make sure you dial everything in beforehand, as certain settings can only be adjusted by our team after she's alive. We can, of course, help you troubleshoot any issues you encounter, but in extreme cases, we'd have to reset her completely, and that would mean a reversion back to factory settings. Matthew filled his lungs with fresh air. It's a pain. Clinical, technical, purchased. The words beat around inside Leslie's skull like an unwelcome ping pong ball. This was not the experience she'd hoped for, or what had been promised on that late night infomercial she'd seen last year. Lifelike billed itself as a company that created artificial intelligence entities that were more human than robot, less computer, more life. So where was the warmth? Where was the sweep of emotion she'd expected to feel? Matthew's instructions were stripping her resolve. Did she really want this? She decided she would call Lifelike later to ask about their return policy. For now, she'd pay attention and be agreeable. Don't shoot the messenger and all. While Matthew's bedside manner could use some work, Leslie figured he was following a script and she couldn't fault him for doing his job. Okay, got it. Leslie nodded, hoping she looked attentive and capable. That all being said, there are a few settings that may shift naturally as part of your daughter's programming. This will be in response to stimulus, learning, development, that sort of thing. After all, your daughter is meant to be very lifelike. He accentuated the final word, and Leslie resisted the urge to roll her eyes. We want you to enjoy the full spectrum of the parenting experience, so be sure you give her the same level of care you would a human baby. You can monitor all of her settings in the Lifelike app, and if they shift, refer back to the manual to see what she needs. If you have questions, call our customer service team. Sounds good. Would you like to ensure your daughter's appearance meets your expectations? Dear God, did he just ask her that? And did he expect her to check off a list or something? Blue eyes, great. Freckle on her temple. Yep, just where I requested it. This was all way too weird. Matthew smiled pleasantly, and beneath his congeniality, Leslie detected determination. He wouldn't leave until she'd opened the egg and proclaimed all was as it should be. Shit. Leslie squatted next to the door and cracked open the silver case. The baby was nestled in purple silk and swaddled in soft cotton. Dark curls swooped across her forehead, the perfect frame for her round, pudgy face. Even in the shabby light of the apartment, her skin looked soft as rose petals. Leslie felt tears building behind her eyes. A smile overtook her lips. This is what she'd been waiting for. This is what she'd had in mind when she placed the order with Lifelike 12 months prior. All of her reservations melted away as she gazed at the infant. She swatted at her eyes and peered up at Matthew. She's perfect. The startup manual was 107 pages long. The type was small, and the wording was overly technical. Leslie read 10 pages before a sharp pain flashed through her forehead, and she realized she was squinting. To make matters worse, she hadn't retained a single word. She'd have to start again. Leslie made herself a cup of tea, grabbed a sleeve of mini donuts, and flipped back to the beginning of the manual. At page 20, she pushed back from the table and sighed. She circled her shoulders, trying to release the tension from her body. She'd been more successful this time around, but her progress was slow. She doubted she'd be able to read the manual in a single sitting. At this rate, it would take days. She looked at Annalie, her new daughter, resting on a kitchen chair nearby. She was still swaddled, still sleeping. In Leslie's mind, this sounded much better than not yet powered up. Urgency skittered through her fingers. She picked up her phone and powered up Instagram. As if the universe knew exactly what she was looking for, Ryan's latest post appeared at the top of her timeline, a family portrait that made her throat close. Ryan had his arm around his new wife, Pauline, a redhead with freckles who somehow managed to look effortlessly beautiful all the time. She held their 1-year-old boy, Cash, in her long arms. The boy looked nothing like his mother and everything like his father. Leslie could see Ryan in the slope of the boy's nose, the dark shock of hair that crowned his head, his ice blue eyes. As Leslie stared at the picture, something cracked deep within her. She crammed the last donut in her mouth, licked powdered sugar from her fingers, and closed Instagram. She launched the Lifelike app and searched through its interface. There had to be a quick start guide somewhere, right? 30 minutes later, Leslie had scoured the website to no avail. In their FAQs section, there was a question about quick starts, but all it said was to read the manual in full before initiating the heartbeat. This is some bullshit, Leslie thought, her frustration building. How did anyone have the patience to go through all of this? She'd already waited longer for her daughter to arrive than if she'd actually been pregnant. She needed to be a mother now. On the home screen, Leslie tapped the Initiate Setup button. A warning popped up. Had she read the manual in full? It was an imperative step in the process, and blah, blah, blah. Leslie closed the window. The app informed her that the configuration would take 15 minutes to complete. 15 minutes, Leslie thought. In 15 minutes, I'll meet my daughter. Some of the settings were easy to choose. Leslie only wanted to change diapers 5 times a day, and she could schedule their frequency down to the minute. She also wanted her daughter to sleep a full 8 hours each night. The choices for temperament, goals, and bonding style were a little more esoteric, but Leslie chose with her gut. She could read up on all of these choices later. Besides, Lifelike had a customer service team. If there were any major errors, she would ask them to be fixed. She was certainly paying the company enough, and with money she didn't truly have. So she expected fantastic service. Temperament? Good-natured, because who doesn't love a good-natured baby? Life goal? Peace, which was vague but sounded more than okay. Bonding style? Secure, of course. 14 minutes later, Leslie's thumb hovered over Initiate Heartbeat. A single tear slid down her cheek as she tapped the screen and waited. Leslie's phone chirped, announcing a new notification. She balanced Annalie in the crook of her left arm and held her phone close to her face. She'd surpassed 200 likes on her latest Instagram post, and the sudden sweep of validation made her blood hum. Leslie had nearly forgotten how incredible it felt to be recognized. Following her Lifelike purchase 12 months prior, Leslie had abstained from posting to social media with any kind of regularity. She'd still post from time to time, but only strategically angled headshots or photos of knickknacks in her cramped apartment. Never a full body shot. Never anything telling. She wanted Annalie to be a complete and utter surprise. She also didn't plan to tell anyone her daughter was from Lifelike. Rather, she'd tell everyone she'd successfully conceived thanks to a sperm donor. She'd done the work, and now it was time to shine. She'd taken nearly 40 photos, trying to snap the perfect selfie and then using her smartphone's timer to get a better angle and wider shot. Throughout the photo shoot, Annalie stretched in her swaddling. She smacked her lips as she slept. Her little chest rose and fell. It was easy to believe she was made of blood and bone rather than metal and wiring. Seconds after the upload, Leslie's phone erupted with congratulations and compliments, and now a comment from Ryan. "She's beautiful, Les. We couldn't be happier for you. Motherhood looks good on you." For the past 2 years, whenever she thought of Ryan, Leslie had heard him in her head telling her that it was okay. They weren't meant to have children. He still loved her. Then, that IVF was far too expensive. Even if they were successful, would they be able to financially care for their child amid all the medical bills? Finally, he didn't love her anymore. Her obsession with motherhood had dulled her, turned her into someone else, someone he didn't know. He'd found Pauline. He was going to marry her. They were expecting a son. But now, Leslie could replace all of those whispers of the past with newfound validation. Motherhood looks good on you. She poured herself a glass of boxed wine, snuggled into the couch with Annalie on her chest, and closed her eyes. It was the first moment of peace she'd experienced in 2 years. Leslie scrolled through the Lifelike app as Annalie wailed in her arms. For something so small, she certainly had volume. Volume Leslie hoped she could decrease or even mute. That had to be possible with AI, right? She couldn't find volume settings, but she did discover a list of sound selections. She flipped through them as the baby continued to cry, the pitch, timbre, and octave switching as she touched her screen. Every choice grated her nerves. How had it come to this? How, when everything had started so well? The first 2 months had been bliss. Leslie's neighbors assumed she'd adopted a baby and lavished her with gifts for the newborn, patterned onesies, jar after jar of baby food, a breast pump, a well-meaning gift, but completely superfluous, home-cooked meals, everything she could possibly need as a new mother. Of course, Leslie let them believe what they wanted to and happily accepted each gift. She delighted in feeding Annalie pureed peas and sweet potatoes during their first month as mother and daughter, though nourishment was entirely optional for lifelike infants. She dressed Annalie in darling outfits festooned with roses, ruffles, and bows. She even enjoyed tending to Annalie's diaper changes, since she knew exactly when her daughter would need a fresh one and whether she'd be going number 1 or number 2. Before bed each night, Leslie consulted the Lifelike app to ensure her daughter was well, which of course meant functioning properly. However, as the surprise and novelty of Annalie's arrival wore off, Leslie found it difficult to stick to the routine she'd initially established. When the baby food gifted to her by her neighbors ran out, she didn't make an effort to purchase more. Since it wasn't a requirement, she figured Annalie could do without. She'd lost track of diaper changing times too. Yes, they happened every day with clockwork accuracy, but they were less of an event now. During the first few months, Leslie had anticipated Annalie's changing times, often placing the baby on her changing table and arming herself with a wipe before her daughter did her business. Now, she relied on the baby crying to tell her when she needed a change. And despite the sleep setting Leslie had selected before initiating Annalie's heartbeat, the baby had begun waking in the middle of the night. And when she woke, she cried and cried and cried. Leslie finally consulted her Lifelike app, which she'd also been neglecting as of late, and discovered that Annalie's settings had changed dramatically. Her good-natured temperament now read as distressed. Her life goal was survival. Her bonding style was anxious preoccupied, whatever that meant. And now she wouldn't stop crying. Leslie changed Annalie's diaper, sang her a lullaby, spooned a bit of canned soup into her mouth, but nothing worked. Leslie didn't know what the hell the baby needed, and the constant bawling was driving her mad. She scrolled to the bottom of the Lifelike app, memorized the customer service number, and punched it into her phone. As the line rang, Annalie's blubbering grew more and more desperate, as if she somehow sensed in her little robot brain that her mother was about to complain about her. Annalie's screams were so piercing, Leslie didn't hear the customer service rep when they came on the line, or when they asked how they could help. She didn't hear a thing until the rep started spouting off a scripted goodbye. "Thank you for calling Lifelike, where we bring home to you." And then the line went dead. "Damn it," Leslie shouted and chucked her phone onto the couch. She marched to the bathroom, Annalie in her arms. She set the baby on the tile floor, her jaw clenched in frustration, her breath coming hard through her nose. Annalie's face was red and splotchy. A pang of guilt shot through Leslie like lightning. Damn the people at Lifelike for doing this, for making Annalie so convincing, for making Leslie feel like a god-awful mother. Leslie caught her reflection in the dark glass above the sink. She looked like hell. There were bags under her eyes, her hair looked like a motel for rodents, and her lips were turned down in an exhausted grimace. "I just need a minute," she said, her voice trembling. She left the bathroom and closed the door behind her. "It sounds like she'll need a manual override," the Lifelike app said over the phone. "I'm looking at her settings right now. Any idea how this happened?" "None." Leslie said. I've taken exceptional care of her. The lie was oily on her tongue, but she wasn't about to be lambasted by a customer service rep for her parenting skills. Okay, let's get someone out to you as soon as possible. That sounds wonderful, Leslie said. Looks like the earliest appointment we have is Wednesday between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Leslie frowned. Why did it feel like she was scheduling an appointment to have a contractor over to fix a leaky faucet? And 2 more days of having to deal with a malfunctioning robot baby? Unacceptable. You don't have anything sooner? Leslie tried hard to keep the edge out of her voice, but it was there, sharp and dark. You could contact our Service Pro team, the rep said. They would likely be able to send someone out to you today. Relief flooded through Leslie, but before she could say yes, this was exactly what she wanted, the Lifelike rep continued. However, access to our Service Pro team is only available for an additional fee. Leslie's chest tightened. You've got to be kidding me. And that fee is $99.95 per call, ma'am. Are you serious? Pain sliced through Leslie's temple, the onset of stress migraine. $100 for a single call, even though I'm already paying you that much monthly? It's a separate service, ma'am. How is this ethical? You're dealing with people's lives here, and stop calling me ma'am, it's condescending. Leslie's voice was ragged. Her chest burned and her whole body shook. I bought something that was really expensive and that I shouldn't have purchased in the first place. It's not working out and it shouldn't be this goddamn hard. Silence floated through the line as Leslie reined in her breathing. I'm sorry, Leslie. Can I call you that? Sure. I'll submit this with a note that if any cancellations come through, your request receives priority. Unless, of course, you want me to connect you with Service Pro? Does it sound like I want help from Service Pro? Understood, Leslie. Is there anything else I can do for you? No. Thank you for calling Lifelike, where we bring home to you. Miraculously, after Leslie hung up, her apartment was blissfully quiet. She assumed that Annalie, much like real human infants, had tired herself out. She would let her sleep as long as she needed. In the interim, she'd do some research. Leslie flipped through the pages of Annalie's instruction manual until she found the section with setting descriptions. A distressed temperament was easy enough to understand. Annalie wasn't getting the level of care she needed, so she was fussy and irritable. It was meant to be a signal for the owner to increase their level of care and attention. The survival life goal meant that Annalie was doing whatever was necessary to thrive. Her independence and personal initiative were higher than they should be. The anxious, preoccupied bonding style was characterized by 4 heavy phrases: emotional hunger, fantasy bond, lack of nurturing, and turbulence. The manual slipped from Leslie's fingers and tumbled to the dirty carpet as realization struck her. She'd failed, hadn't she? Annalie's settings had shifted because she'd been doing a shitty job, not because the AI technology was malfunctioning. Leslie had wanted this for so long, and now she couldn't cut it. The air suddenly felt suffocating in the apartment. Leslie ran to the nearest window, threw it open, and took 5 deep breaths. Could she turn this around? Surely she could learn from this failure and strive to be better, right? She had to. She had to succeed at this. She screwed her eyes shut and called forward her memories. The painful ones, the joyful ones, everything that had brought her to this moment. Making love to Ryan and feeling like this was it, the time they'd conceived naturally, only to see that one dreaded line on a pregnancy test the following month. The bottle of wine she'd drowned in when he'd left her, that little stir of hope in her womb when she'd seen the Lifelike infomercial, the way she'd finally felt complete when she first held Annalie in her arms. She could do this. She could be a good mother. She simply had to remember and rebuild. Leslie's phone dinged. She pulled the device from her pocket, opened Instagram, and squinted at the new photo posted on Ryan's account. The image was confusing at first. She was staring at a cropped body shot of a woman wearing jeans, her red t-shirt pulled up to expose her midriff. There was nothing exceptional or strange or disturbing or magical about the belly on display. But when she read the caption, adrenaline threatened to scald her insides. Coming soon, we're hoping for a girl this time, hashtag proud papa. Pauline was pregnant again. The belly was hers, and beneath her creamy freckled skin, a baby was growing inside her. The newfound motivation Leslie had cultivated just moments ago dimmed. Her sense of failure flared anew. Her body had betrayed her. Finances kept her from creating a family with the man she'd once loved. And now Leslie had bought a child. And for what? She trudged to her kitchen, rifled through her cupboards, and pulled out the bottle of cheap gin she kept in case of emergencies. Leslie sunk into the couch cushions, staring at Pauline's belly and the joyous comments accumulating under the post. She tipped back the bottle until everything blurred. Leslie awoke to the sound of someone screaming, a bright, shrill cry that jarred her senses. She tried to open her eyes, but the light streaming into her apartment was too harsh. Her pulse beat against her skull, and an unsettling pressure weighed heavily on her chest. Was she having a panic attack? No, there was something on top of her, something warm and moving. Annalee. Leslie forced her eyes open. Annalee's mouth was wide and angry as she bellowed, her breath hot on Leslie's face. A deluge of tears streamed down the baby's cheeks as she squirmed and kicked, trying to burrow deeper into the warmth of her mother. But it was the state of her hands that sucked all the breath from Leslie's chest. Annalee's tiny palms were smeared with a red substance that resembled blood. A good deal of her fake skin had peeled back, revealing an intricate maze of metal and wiring. The mechanical digits flexed as they searched for Leslie's skin. When they found an acceptable entry point, the fingers dug in, and Leslie felt a flash of pain shuttle through her. Even as her discomfort intensified, Leslie gazed upon Annalee with wonder. Beneath the horror of the situation, another sensation welled up inside her, something strong and sure that she couldn't quite pinpoint. Sweet baby, she whispered, my girl, my girl, my girl. Leslie pulled Annalee from her chest and sat up. Rivers of blood poured down her arms and slicked the skin beneath her t-shirt, but Leslie paid her injuries no mind. She was focused on Annalee. She bounced her baby and cooed, trying to get her daughter's cries under control. She wiped blood from Annalee's face, unsure if it was the synthetic stuff Lifelike had injected into Annalee's stainless steel veins or her own. She examined Annalee's hands gently. Her poor baby, her poor sweet baby. And Annalee was hers, she reminded herself. This beautiful infant belonged to her, regardless of how she'd come by her. Screw all the pregnant bellies and people with more money and therefore access to biological science and everyone who knew how to do this parenthood thing right from the get-go. They had nothing to do with her relationship with Annalee, absolutely nothing. It's okay, sweetheart, Leslie said, pulling Annalee closer still. You found me, and I'm never letting you go. Leslie swiped tears from her cheeks. She looked at the bathroom door, already knowing what she would find. There was a hole in the door, the product of something scrabbling against the wood for hours on end. Smudges of red patterned the floor of Leslie's apartment, forming a trail from the bathroom door to the couch. Motherly pride capsized her heart. She came for me, Leslie thought. She needs me. She needs her mother, and I need her. As if in response, Annalee reached up and fisted the skin on Leslie's cheek. The infant's fingers disappeared beneath flesh. And in that moment, Leslie didn't feel pain. She felt something so much sweeter. Connection. It was a perfect moment, a moment that needed to be captured. Wincing, Leslie lifted her phone and smiled.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. So Tiffany Michelle Brown, folks, The Price of Motherhood. What a story. It was sad, funny, creepy, deeply troubling. Lovely, lovely work. Thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
it is our practice at Story Hour, just between authors, to just take a brief moment, pause, take a breath, and let the work we just heard sort of settle and get ourselves ready for the next one. So we're going to do that. Take just a brief moment, take a breath, and have a quick chill. Tiffany Michelle Brown, folks, The Price of Motherhood. Our next author is M. Lopes da Silva. We're really delighted to to bring M. Lopes da Silva here. M. Lopes da Silva is a polyamorous, bisexual, and non-binary trans mask author, artist, and critic from LA. He writes pulp and poetry and lectures about the political power of desire. In 2020, Unnerving magazine published his novella Hooker, which is a pro-queer, pro-sex work, feminist retro wave pulp thriller about a bisexual sex worker hunting a serial killer through the streets of 1980s Los Angeles using hooks as her weapon of choice. That's kind of right down my alley, actually. In 2022, Dreadstone Press published his debut novelette, What Ate the Angels, a queer vor sludge fest that travels beneath the streets of LA, starring a non-binary ASMR artist and their vor-loving girlfriend in Split Screen Volume 2. Weird Books just released his collection of heartbreaking and exquisite queer horror stories, Infinity Mathing at the Shore and Other Disruptions, this March of 2024. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you to Tiffany for reading that. That was absolutely chilling. Oof, that one's gonna linger on the brain. Definitely, 100%. Very briefly to share again the books. This is a copy of Hooker from Unnerving magazine.
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Split Scream Volume 2, along with Cynthia Gomez, another excellent author that I recommend that you check out. She's fantastic. And here is the book I'm going to be reading from tonight, Infinity Mathing at the Shore and Other Disruptions. And I'll read a couple of short ones. The one I'm going to be starting with is The One Who Whispers, Hold Me Closer. Yeah, it's kind of in that style, the Pretty Woman poster. I was thinking a little bit of that. I had some other.
That was what I thought.
Yeah.
That it's very much like that. And those legs aren't hers.
Yeah, no.
They actually had like a leg model just
Yeah.
for the poster.
Which is I love that kind of stuff, that little trivia where they have to dress it up a little bit more to sell it.
I guess.
All right. Yeah. Okay. The One Who Whispers, Hold Me Closer. In thickets dense with wood and lush green, they woke, heart quickening with chlorophyll, and the boy's body stirred, budding anew. They were holding the bones of a human, intimately threaded through the skeleton like muscles, and separating from the corpse was slow, melancholy work. It was painful to disentangle. They ached with every effort. The body remembered why they were holding the bones, but the boy in the body was new. He hadn't lived long enough to remember anything. His heart was quick with chlorophyll and love. Spring was coming. He smelled it, a thin musk, livid and green. Finally, they were free of the corpse. Vine-sinewed, wood-muscled, the ancient body craved light, so the boy stretched out lazily, limbs spilling up and over everywhere, extremities curling into leaves so thick and pink they were petals. They were flesh, and the petals of flesh ascended to the sunlight, the corpse abandoned and pulped to powder below, and the ancient yellow human skull that had been part of their body for centuries now was presented to the sun. Who the skull had first belonged to was forgotten. Even the body did not know. The nameless sockets caught the golden glow of the sunlight in their twin cups and kept burning with it, an ancient torch reignited by Imbolc's fire. It was February 1st. The boy in the body didn't know anything about calendars or clocks or why his body had a womb, but he knew the time and that he was not the first seed to bloom here. His torso was thickly ringed with so many broken hearts. If he cut himself, he could count them all. They were dead lines forming his grain. The boy shuddered and the body shook in sympathy. He would not make that cut. Instinctively, he knew what love was and that he craved its touch. He would go and find love for himself. The young architect walked along the hiking trail, drawing a house like a tree in his mind, with solar panel leaves and brachial ventilation systems and sewers that rooted responsibly into the earth. An adobe, no, a living kitchen, complete with herb garden and a mushroom shelf. A composting basement. He kept rearranging the living space, never satisfied with his bathrooms. The trickiest thing was to remember the light, an invisible sun in an unlived place, and how to best hold it in a room. Light kept the space alive. A flicker of gold among the shadows caught his eye. He hesitated. The gold was dappled with pink and green, and the wooden brambles nearby were tangled so beautifully, so intricately. He found himself searching for his phone in his pocket as he left the trail. He regretted not bringing his sketchbook along. He didn't notice the dirty fragment of tibia that he stepped on along the way. The sun loved him first, lavishly, wonderfully. The sun spoiled his son on earth. His celestial warmth filled the boy's ancient body with new life. Fresh vines itched and unfurled. Everything was perfect because the boy felt perfectly loved, only that wasn't quite true because there was a small part of the boy, some portion inside of him that could not be reached by the sunlight's love, no matter how the body twisted and contorted to catch the light. He didn't yet realize that fragment of himself wanted love that the sun could not provide, a vitamin the UV spectrum did not deliver. He was too young to know. It was that small part, that tiny inner shadow, that made the boy turn away from the sun and face the forest floor where the architect stood looking up at him. The young architect was the most beautiful being the boy had ever seen. Even the sunshine was not as sweet as the wonder that lived in the center of his eyes. The curiosity that burned there was brighter than fire, somehow brighter than the glow captured in the sockets of the boy's skull. Flustered sap spurted afresh. Buds itched out of the boy's body, pinking his green. The architect opened his mouth as if to speak. Then came the crashing of the young architect's fiancée among the leaves, her voice calling out his name. "Brandon? Brandon?" "I'm here," the architect said. He looked back, but the boy was already gone. The architect's arm was looped through the elbow of a young woman with dark, serious eyes. She listened to him as he gestured at the trees. I know I had my phone out. It's silly that I didn't take the picture, but I don't know. You weren't there. The thing was, I don't even know how to describe it. There was the skull and I guess, you see those vines there? A lot of those, and thorns, but structured somehow into a torso with these scribbles of, it was like a sculpture that could move. Like an animatronic? No, not at all. The movement, God damn it, I should have hit record. Hidden far back in a bracken, the boy in the body watched the woman guide the young man back to the path. The skull's jaw canted open slightly with need. Growth was necessary. The body sprouted new air sacs, corn silk vocal cords, a fleshy palate and thick tongue to slide along the skull's teeth. "Brandon," they said. Brandon, too distracted for the soporific release that sex would bring, spent the night awake as Celine slept next to him. He kept fidgeting with the illustrations in his sketchbook, relentless repetitions of vines and skulls. None of them could capture what he'd felt. The lines were too dry, technical when they should be expressive, and the light, there was something about the light that he couldn't quite convey on paper. Brandon scribbled over the current batch of doodles that he'd made, turned a page, and began again. He drew the wild tangle, the skull that had stared at him with such intensity, he thought for a minute. He wished that he could write poetry because Brandon wanted to repeat words that felt like a spell, that summoned that moment back to him. That moment when he believed again that the universe was wild and beautiful and loved him as much as he loved it. Red-faced, he reached for himself beneath the sheets, staring at the marks on the pages he'd made. The image tilted with the rhythm of his need. In the moonlight, the body was stiff and slow, and the boy was left with only his hope for company. Still, he hoped. He dreamed, and his dreams were indigo blueprints, and the home he built was the architect's body. Brandon came back. He'd told Celine that he wanted to hike the trail alone, and even though she teased him about wanting to spend more time apart from her, she hadn't really objected. The front of the trail was busy this time. Brandon kept passing hikers clutching water bottles, their wrists uniformly adorned with smartwatches. When he got to the bend where he'd seen them, he stopped and waited for a while until the trail was clear, until the quiet crept back and the lizards and mice started rustling the weeds. Then he slipped away, angling towards the place where he remembered seeing the gold. Over the past week, the boy in the body had grown into a man. He was older now, his need for love more urgent and more sharply defined. He would not last forever, he knew. He would not know a winter. The green skin of his vines had coarsened, darkened, and his buds were in bloom. He thought often of the architect. He had seen many people travel along the trail by now, but none of them had been him. So it was like dreaming, like a continuation of the man in the body's dream when the architect returned to him. The architect was tired, the edges of his eyes pink with rough sleep. "You're real," the architect said softly. "I wasn't sure, but you really are." "Brandon," the man in the body said, his voice like the groan of wind through oak branches. Brandon stared at him, at the miracle in front of him that somehow knew his name. The man in the body tilted his torso up so that Brandon could see the fresh petals growing there, dewy and dense around the leaking gash in their chest. "Are you hurt?" Brandon asked, extending a hand hesitantly. "Brandon," the man in the body said. He knew no other words. The architect approached the living bramble, staring at the yellow skull that peered down at him. He looked more closely at the separating slash in the wood. It didn't look like an injury after all. The petals grew naturally from the edges of the thin slit. When he touched one of them, the body moaned, a living harmonium. The man in the body brought his skull closer to face Brandon. When the jaw parted, revealing their fresh-grown tongue, the architect found himself opening his own mouth to receive it. There were thorns and cries of pleasure embittered with prickles as the man in the body loved the architect. There were new parts to grow, fresh stamens to spend on his lover, but after the holding and being held, the man in the body always let Brandon go. And Brandon would go, his steps light on the trail, a little drunk with love. If Celine noticed, she didn't say anything, so Brandon didn't say anything. He thought about him, about their body like a stained glass ceiling above him, breaking the light into 10,000 beautiful pieces. He'd forgotten to take a picture with his phone again, but this time he didn't care. The spring was full of their trysts. The only thing they wanted was to be together, flesh tied taut to vine, lost in the miracle of finding each other. Celine started to notice, not just Brandon's absence, but the results of his absences. The hours he needed on his own stretched into afternoons, evenings, camping trips. There were the bruises, scratches and scrapes that kept getting bigger and healing slowly. When her accusations came, Brandon did nothing to deny them. It was easier to be accused of infidelity than loving a miracle. Besides, he had the man in the body to return to. Brandon was trying to teach him to speak English. He wanted him to choose a name for himself. Brandon's work for the architectural firm kept getting sent back with enough notes to fill a novella. His designs were labeled impractical, uncomfortable, and inhuman, but Brandon knew that they were examples of the best work he'd ever made. He was drawing houses for gods, for miracles. When the company fired Brandon, it hardly bothered him. They were throwing away real talent. He chose the name Christopher, after one of the main characters from the A.A. Milne books that Brandon taught from. Other words, soft and supple, came soon after. Summer's apple trees thickened with fruit, and the new seed in Christopher's chest grew heavy. Their trysts became frenzied with a new, strange urgency. Christopher was restless. Something was coming. Things would change. They were running out of time. At night, the body remembered what was to come and shared their wisdom with Christopher in a dream. Autumn's chill would be felt first. Their sap would move slower or become pure shards of ice if a frost hit early, slashing through the body's capillaries from the inside out. On one of these very cold days, when the seed in Christopher's chest was very warm and heavy, Brandon would come to them, and Christopher would want only to hold him very close, very tightly, But this would be the last holding, because once Brandon was tightly secured in their arms, the body would sleep the same sleep that it had slept for thousands of years, and Christopher would die. And Brandon, trapped beneath Christopher's body, would die too. A long, slow death. The body remembered. 10,000 or more people had been held by the bramble body and their yellow skull during the harvest, and none had gone to them willingly. Centuries of humans spurning their touch. Before that, a long, long time ago, there had been other bodies like the man's, and those bodies had mutually entangled with love and desire. The memory of their passing was the most bittersweet of all. It mortified Christopher, those ghosts of antediluvian lovers, their touches the faintest shadows falling across time to cool his spring quick sap. He couldn't keep anything from Brandon. As best he could, in the words he knew, Christopher told him everything. The architect walked back down the trailhead, trying to remember where he'd parked. The hikers gave him funny looks and steered wide paths around him. His car had been towed away weeks ago. He'd forgotten that he'd only been wearing the forest floor for over a month now. He fished his phone out of his pants and turned it on. His cell phone still had a charge, a slim red line of battery beneath a broken screen. He called a ride home. Autumn came, and Christopher knew that it was time. He hadn't seen Brandon since he'd left in the summer. He didn't know exactly how long it had been, but he could feel the absence like an ache, like he'd been hollowed out inside and there was nothing left but dying to do. Christopher was dying. He was stretched thin, about to become another ring in the grain, and maybe this time, without a human's corpse to nourish them during the winter, the body would die too. Maybe this was the end of all of them, an end to the endless winters and spring, an end to all this yearning. That was when Christopher heard him. Brandon, the man in the body said. Christopher, the architect said. Brandon removed his clothing. He approached them, but the brambles flinched. Don't, the man in the body said. I want to hold you. Brandon reached out and caressed the yellow swoop of zygomatic bone tenderly. And I want you to hold me closer. Thorns like needles sewed them together on the forest floor. The wind stirred the branches above. The sky was such a bright blue. As he slowly died, Brandon thought how wonderful it was that sometimes miracles needed to be loved too. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh.
If I have a little bit of time left, I will change the mood entirely with another story. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you so much. I'll change the mood a bit with a story called A Cockroach in the Brain, which, bit of warning, there's some transphobia in here. And with that, let's go. Jake Spring, the earworm king, needed another hit, and he needed it bad. Everything was past due, in the red and bleeding out. The residual checks were down to their scummiest residue, the kind of grease that wasn't even thick enough to hide Lincoln's tomb on a penny, and Jake barely had anything to show for it. The new apartment he moved into after the divorce was still empty, just full of Jake and his unpacked boxes, a futon couch, a big flat television set mounted on a wall, a kitchen full of empties and pizza boxes, a grown kid that wouldn't answer his fucking phone calls no matter how much money Jake funneled to that ungrateful shit's bank account, an ex leaving texts that were goddamn novellas. Jake slugged down another shot of cheap bourbon from a plastic drive-through cup that had never made it to the garbage and ended up becoming a permanent roommate. The paint was so scuffed away, it was impossible to tell which drive-through the cup had originally come from. It was Jake's favorite, his chalice. Ingratitude is the attitude, Jake said aloud, trying it out. It felt right. The slogan sang how ungrateful Sandra had been for all of the hours he'd invested in his career and all of the money that he'd made for them. How, in the act of utmost ingratitude, she'd effortlessly passed that ungrateful gene onto their own child, left him a legacy of it. He frowned into his cup. The brat that Jake Spring had spent years loving and raising as his daughter, his precious daddy's girl, all that was being thrown away now by an adult stranger who wanted Jake to call it Robert and son, and for Jake to understand and foot the bill for a pricey surgery. Ingratitude, clearly. A fundamental misunderstanding of what Jake Spring had wanted to foster and leave behind in the world. He had to be clear about these things. Clarity was the order of the day. The client had given Jake Spring a very firm deadline, and he was already far behind it. The client was furious. Jake had until the end of the night to find his muse, or she'd be dragged in and forced to witness his execution or something like that. Jake laughed aloud at his own bullshit. Nobody else did anymore. It was 5 o'clock. He moved the three music files he'd been tweaking for the past 6 hours into a digital trash can and was rewarded with the sound of digital paper crumpling up in his headphones. The songs had all been stilted, forgettable, DOA, not the kind of thing a human synapse would summon up while a person was distracted. Not good enough, not earworms. Nothing now. Earworms were only partially understood by science, the bulk of their mystery hidden by the coy meat of human brains. Auditory cortexes in divine waltzes with memory. Upbeat melodies, simple to catch on to, interrupted by something unexpected. Words that wormed in. The melodies felt infinite, unending, and human brains in love with patterns kept trying to guess what should go next, kept solving the puzzle nobody posed them, one note after another, leaping onward. He could steal. He'd done it before, taken a popular melody and ripped the guitar and vocals out of it, rearranged a couple percussion moments, and soon it was as good as new, and difficult to legally sniff out the original cadaver. A lot of poppy rhythms were pretty similar, after all, and Jake was a clever butcher. He finished what remained in the bottom of his plastic chalice and reached for his phone. He checked his email again and found something new nestled among the all-caps call-outs from his client. A message with a subject line that he hadn't expected. Fealty for the Earworm King. The nickname was something that he'd given himself years ago, part of the press release packet for a popular dog food company. He'd earned it, too, one catchy jingle of his after another, netting millions of dollars in sales. Clients had come running once, begging for Jake's musical insight, his infectious touch. The sender was some nothing spam bot of an address, a string of numbers typed after the word muse. There was an attachment, too, all the standard sorts of warning bells and whistles. Jake opened it. There wasn't anything inside of the message, just the attachment. It was a WAV file titled, "What You've Been Looking For." He scanned it for viruses. Nothing. Jake smiled at the screen, invincible with bourbon, and downloaded the file. It immediately opened up on an audio player and started playing. The melody started off subtle, fascinating, tickling the very exterior of Jake Spring's ear canal, and he understood that this was suboral, recorded the same way that ASMR was commonly recorded, and that the tickling was not unpleasant and formed a peppy beat. Jake had just reached for the volume to turn it up when the sound level in the file increased as well, and Jake winced and realized to his horror and fascination what he was listening to. It was the recording of a cockroach trapped inside of a human's left ear, edited into a melody. The bug flailed, its phantom legs scraping Jake's eardrum into raw, bloody holes, and he screamed and tried to stop the playback, but the microphone was panning from left to right in such a steady and deliberate way that the cockroach rhythmically scraped and twitched its way directly through his brain, only to pause just long enough in the right ear canal for another hideous ear draining. And it was all catchy, catchy as hell, a real earworm, and Jake Spring knew earworms. Jake tried to disconnect his expensive wireless headset, but he panicked. He stood and his arms yanked through the air at nothing, slapping his cup away and banging directly into a nearly empty bookshelf. Framed photographs of his family rained down on him, sending Jake to the floor. The back of his head hit the carpeted concrete of his office floor, but his headphones kept playing the melody into his dwindling consciousness. Jake Spring's mind memorized, mesmerized, anticipating each note of the insect's journey. It crawled through him, an unknown pop sensation that made him want to claw everything inside of his skull out with his fingernails. The music incubated him. It infested him. He wasn't supposed to feel like this. He was supposed to be booze numb, untouched, not stuck with this terrible cockroach skittering back and forth inside of his brain. And yet, wasn't this what he was always looking for? Wasn't this a hit, an honest to God earworm? And wasn't this the sort of connection that he'd always wanted with a son he didn't want? A part of him hoped that Robert had sent the file, because the bubblegum tremor of the roach's legs promised the earworm king a kind of forever, a puzzle for his brain to keep solving with dreadful certainty, leaping onward and onward. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow. I loved both of those stories. Thank you so much. M. Lopes da Silva and Tiffany Michelle Brown. Thank you both so much for coming and sharing your work tonight. Really great program. And it's so often the case, Laura and I don't typically or don't often design programs for any sort of like cohesion between the authors, but often just the same. There's kind of a unity with the program, and certainly that was the case tonight. Just
Yeah, did you two talk about this?
Not at all.
No coordination, just how it
Wow.
works out.
Nope.
Really awesome work. All right. Laura, we are lucky people, man. We get to
really
do this
are.
every week. So I'd like to thank our authors tonight, Tiffany Michelle Brown and M. Lopes da Silva. I'd like to thank my co-host, Laura Blackwell, without whom really wouldn't be able to do this at all. And all of you out there for coming back every week and making this something that we want to continue to do. So come on back next week, because next week we have Vanessa Fogg and Mariska Pichette. So we'll see you next week. Until then, stay safe, take care, and bye-bye.